Rain hammered the rusty tin roof like 1,000 knocks on memory. In a forgotten coal town in Pennsylvania, Laura Hayes stood inside the dim, empty factory, her hands trembling as she touched a loose plank on the floor. A faint clicking sound echoed from beneath like the breath of metal trapped too long. She lifted the board, and a wave of scorched iron and old oil hit her nose, making her heart tighten. Below was a block of steel engraved with the Hayes Motors emblem and a strip of concrete sealed shut. She didn't know it yet, but what lay under that slab would unlock a secret powerful enough to make a corporation tremble. A gust of wind slipped through the cracked roof, stirring an old photograph on the wall as if the past itself were calling her name. On Monday morning in a damp little apartment, Laura Hayes sat at her kitchen table staring at a thick envelope from a law office in Pittsburgh. The papers inside were cold and final, like a verdict. "You are the legal heir to Hayes Motors." She let out a dry laugh. Heir to what? A pile of rust? Outside, the sound of a school bus horn mixed with the rain. Her two kids, Rosie and Ben, were arguing over a torn raincoat. "Go on, you'll be late," she said, forcing a smile. "Mom's fine." But she wasn't fine at all. Laura worked part-time as a nurse at a local nursing home. She'd once dreamed of opening a small clinic, an honest version of the American dream. But when her husband walked out, that dream collapsed under unpaid loans and hospital bills. Now all she had left were 3 overdue paychecks, 2 growing kids, and a factory abandoned for 30 years. She remembered the last time she'd heard her father's voice, in a short, static-filled phone call 15 years ago. "Laura," he'd said, "when the wind changes, don't be afraid, keep moving." Then the line went dead. The next day he disappeared. Some said he'd betrayed Grey Rock Mining, the company that once ruled the town. Others whispered he'd gone mad fighting them. That afternoon, Laura drove her old Ford along the winding Appalachian roads. The Hayes Motors since 1959 sign leaned sideways, paint peeling like old skin. The iron gate was jammed, but the lock still sat intact. She slipped in the key and turned it. The click echoed hollowly into the emptiness, like the heartbeat of the past. Inside was a world frozen in time, lathes coated in dust, belts hanging like cobwebs. A corroded safety sign on the wall read, "Safety is strength." Laura stepped carefully across the cracked concrete floor as beams of sunlight fell through holes in the roof like silent spotlights. Her father's welding table still stood there, the paint chipped, the tool chest half open. She remembered Ben asking once, "Did Grandpa leave us anything besides debt?" She had smiled then. Maybe he left what he believed in, something worth everything he had. She bent down and picked up a rusty scrap of metal. The word windline was faintly carved into it. "Dad," she whispered, "if they said you were wrong, I'll find the truth." The wind whistled through the broken rafters, carrying a faint tapping sound like an answer from long ago. Laura looked up, her eyes steady. She didn't know it yet, but just a few steps ahead she was about to begin a journey to reclaim not only her father's name, but her own sense of justice. 2 days later, Laura returned to the factory with a bag of tools, a flashlight, and a determination she couldn't explain. The metal door screeched as she pushed it open. The air inside was cold, thick with the smell of old oil and iron, as if someone had been working there just yesterday, then vanished. She started cleaning. Every clang of metal echoed like a call from the past. She found a wooden box wedged between 2 drawers at her father's old welding bench. She pried it open with a screwdriver. A puff of dust rose like smoke. Faded letters appeared. Hayes Windline Prototype. A burned notebook and several yellowed blueprints rolled tight with a rubber band were inside. Laura carefully unrolled them. The handwriting was firm and deliberate, with neat notes in the margins. "Foldable blades, reduces wind shear, stronger, cheaper." It hit her this wasn't the work of a madman. It was a design built for workers, for the future her father had believed in. A small envelope was taped inside the cover. She opened it. Her father's voice seemed to echo in her head as she read the shaky lines. "If you hear the wind change, it means I was right. They'll call me crazy because I refuse to sell what's right. Don't let them bury it like they buried me." Laura gripped the paper, her heart pounding. Memories flooded back, nights in the garage, him teaching her to weld, his sunburned hands, his bright eyes. He used to say, "Someday you'll hear the wind for me." A long creak suddenly came from the roof like a whisper. She flashed her light upward. Only dust spiraled in the beam. "Calm down, Laura," she told herself. "It's just wind." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just wind. She pulled out her phone, snapped photos of every page, then sealed the notebook and letter inside a plastic bag. On her way out, she stopped and looked back at the workshop glowing under the amber light of sunset. In that glow, the word windline carved on the metal she'd found earlier shimmered faintly, as if speaking to her. "Dad," she whispered, "if you're still here, I'll finish what you started." The wind brushed past, gentle but certain, making the notebook in her hand tremble slightly. She clutched it tighter. She didn't see the pair of eyes watching her from the cracked window, nor did she know her search had just awakened a secret many had tried to bury forever. The next morning, Laura brought her documents and the deed to the factory and town hall. She requested suspending the demolition order, citing the properties. Historical and technological value. The man at the records counter looked up and smirked. "Ms. Hayes, that place is industrial junk. If you're smart, you'll let it come down, fewer taxes, fewer problems." Laura gripped the form tightly. "No, I want to keep it." He shrugged and stamped received with visible reluctance. Later that afternoon, just as she pulled into her driveway, a black pickup truck stopped by the curb. Two men got out, their leather shoes caked with mud, long coats brushing the ground. "Ms. Hayes," the taller one asked smoothly. "Yes, we represent Gray Rock Mining. Heard you've taken an interest in a former company property." Laura narrowed her eyes. "I'm just preserving the place my father built." The man smiled faintly, his eyes cold. "Your father worked for us, a talented man but stubborn. In America, everyone has a price. You just have to decide what yours is." Laura felt her hands go cold. "If you're implying something, say it." "We're suggesting you stop digging up the past. It helps no one, especially your children." From the upstairs window, Rosie watched everything. When the truck finally pulled away, she ran downstairs. "Mom, who were they? How did they know about me?" Laura took her daughter's hand, her voice trembling. "It's nothing, Rosie. I'll handle it." "No, Mom, don't keep things from me anymore." Her daughter's eyes were so steady and brave that Laura could only nod. The next day, Laura went to the police station to file a report. The young officer scanned the page and sighed. "There's no evidence, Ms. Hayes. Might just be a misunderstanding." Laura's tone was calm, even. "I understand. No one in this town crosses Gray Rock, right?" He said nothing. That night, Laura drove up the hills to visit Noah Blake, who'd once worked alongside her father. His small house sat among the trees, filled with wooden wind turbine models and the soft glow of oil lamps. When she showed him the blueprint, the older man froze. "My God, Thomas really finished it. You know about Windline?" Noah nodded slowly. "We all did, but Gray Rock bought everything either with money or with fear." Laura sat down across from him, meeting his eyes. "If I want to finish it, will you help me?" Noah smiled. "I'm an old man, but I still remember how to measure the wind." Outside, the wind howled through the window frame, carrying the faint scent of old coal smoke. Laura looked out into the dark, where the factory roof shimmered faintly in the pale moonlight. In the wind, she could almost hear her father's voice again. "Don't be afraid when the wind changes." On Sunday morning, the wind from the Appalachian hills blew harder than usual. Laura and Noah stood behind the Hayes Motors workshop, staring at the steel frame they'd just assembled. Beside them, Rosie filmed on her phone while little Ben counted screws with his tiny hands. "Sure you don't want a break?" Noah asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Laura shook her head, smiling wearily. "I've rested long enough." It had taken them a week to rebuild the turbine following her father's design Windline Prototype 3. A simple steel frame, blades made from recycled alloy, and an old lathe motor. Total cost barely $600, most covered by neighbors donating spare parts. As they bolted on the final blade, the sky turned slate gray. "The wind's changing," Noah murmured. Laura connected the wires to the converter, her heartbeat quickening. "All right, Windline, breathe." The blades began to turn slowly, then slower, then stopped completely. "No way," Laura whispered, gripping the lever. She tried again, nothing. One axle was jammed. Rain began to fall, each drop heavy, like laughter at her expense. Rosie pointed the camera toward her mother. "Mom, let it go. You know Grandpa failed too." Laura lifted her head, eyes wet but fierce. He didn't fail, he was just waiting for the right wind. She stepped out into the rain, unlatched the motor casing, and adjusted the blade angle according to a faded note from the journal. "Tilt 27 degrees facing west, that's where the real wind lies." She tightened the bolts and flipped the switch again. A low hum filled the air, then grew fuller, stronger. The blades spun faster, catching the gust. The small indicator light flicked on a weak but living current. Rosie screamed, "Mom, it's alive!" Ben threw his hands up, cheering like it was fireworks night. In the dim light, Laura's face was streaked with rain and tears. "Dad," she whispered, "we did it." Noah chuckled softly. "Well, kid, looks like the wind chose the right person." The next morning, Rosie's video swept across social media. Her caption was simple. "When the old wind blows again, it carries new hope." The hashtag Wind Revival began trending everywhere. People from town started showing up at the factory. Some brought coffee, some brought homemade pies, and others just stood silently watching. For the first time in years, light in that town wasn't born of coal, but of wind. A silver SUV pulled up in front of the Hayes Motors gate 3 days after the Windline Revival video spread across local news sites. A man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a sleek black umbrella. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Elliot Crane, legal representative for Gray Rock Mining." Laura wiped the grease from her hands and said flatly, "I have nothing left to say to your company." "On the contrary," he smiled, "my company has plenty to say to you." Elliot opened his briefcase and placed a thick folder on the metal table. Grey Rock is offering to buy this entire property for $2 million, 10 times its current market value. Laura stared at the number, her chest tightening as if a lead block had just dropped inside her. $2 million enough to change their lives, save her family, wipe out every debt. Why would they want to buy something they once called industrial junk? She asked. Elliot shrugged. Our company is planning a new energy center. Besides, you don't have the capital to maintain this place anyway. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You have 2 young kids, Ms. Hayes. Think about them. Laura stood up, meeting his gaze. In this country, people still have the right not to sell their soul, don't they? Elliot's smile faded. He snapped his briefcase shut. You're just like your father. Let's hope you don't end up like him. He walked out, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne mixing with oil and rust. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She opened her journal and wrote, "If they want to silence this wind, they'll have to go through me." Close to midnight, her phone vibrated. A distorted voice came through a blocked number. "Walk away, Laura, before it's too late." She gripped the phone but didn't reply, just stared out the window. Outside the Appalachian, wind roared, rattling the tin roof of the workshop. Around 2 a.m., an explosion jolted her awake. Flames lit up the night sky. The factory was burning. Laura ran out, Rosie and Ben right behind her, shouting into the phone, calling 911 between gusts of wind and choking black smoke. The fire climbed the corrugated walls, illuminating the half-charred letters, Hayes Motors. Laura tried to rush inside to save the notebook and blueprints, but the smoke was too thick. Rosie held her back, shouting, "No, Mom. I backed up the files. I took pictures, remember?" Laura froze. "You did what?" "They taught us in school how to back up data. I thought Grandpa would have wanted that." Laura sank to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms amid the glow of the flames. "Good girl, Rosie, your grandfather would be so proud." When the firefighters arrived, the factory was nothing but a skeleton of charred steel. The police called it an electrical accident, but Laura knew better. It was a warning. A week after the fire, Laura walked into the town hall with her attorney, Helen Morris, a former prosecutor known for environmental cases. Across the table, Elliot Crane sat confidently. Stacks of documents piled high. Grey Rock had filed a lawsuit accusing her of industrial property violation and spreading false information. Laura couldn't afford a legal team, only an external hard drive containing her father's windline designs and a few old photos. But she had something they didn't, the truth. As the hearing began, Elliot's tone was icy. "Members of the board, this invention doesn't belong to Ms. Hayes. It's an unfinished product of Grey Rock dated 1983. Laura rose to her feet. "My father, Thomas Hayes, created it. He disappeared after refusing to sell the patent to your company." The room fell silent. Then whispers began to spread. Helen stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "These records," she said, "were recently released under the Freedom of Information Act. They prove Grey Rock received multiple warnings about coal contamination at the southern mine, and the person who reported it was Thomas Hayes." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Rumors. There's no witness." Helen's voice sharpened. "There is." The back door creaked open. An older man with a thin frame walked in. Laura gasped. "Noah Blake." He laid an envelope on the table. "This is a copy of a letter Thomas sent me before he disappeared," Noah said, trembling but firm. "If I don't make it, give this to my daughter. Grey Rock will try to bury everything." Inside the envelope was the windline schematic identical to Laura's and an internal Grey Rock memo, signed by executives, confirming they had used the prototype without permission after Thomas vanished. Elliot's face turned pale. The board immediately voted to suspend operations at the old mine pending investigation. News spread like wildfire. Local outlets, then regional CNN, ran the headline. "Single Mom vs. Grey Rock, the wind that shook the coal empire." The hashtag #justice for Hayes flooded social media. Under the storm of public outrage, Grey Rock withdrew its lawsuit. The townspeople, once afraid of the corporation, began siding with Laura. A retired miner approached her. "Your dad warned us back then. Now it's our turn to help you rebuild." Laura smiled softly. "I'm not trying to destroy them. I just want the wind to be free again." That night she returned to the burned factory and stood among the cold ashes. The night wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of smoke and hope. "Dad," she whispered, "they've finally heard you." 2 months after the hearing, the small town that once drowned in coal smoke had become unusually lively. Outside the old Hayes Motors factory, dozens of people gathered: mechanics, former miners, engineering students, even homemakers who used to pray their next electricity bill wouldn't break them. Laura stood in the middle of them, her old oil-stained jacket glinting in the sun, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "My father once believed the wind could save us. Today, you are that wind." Applause erupted. Mr. Noah lifted a new blueprint high. Windline, the community version, easy to assemble, low cost, made locally. Rosie streamed it live. Within hours, the #wind for tomorrow climbed to the top of the state's trending list. As the first turbines began to spin, Laura felt like she was hearing the town's heartbeat again. Cafes reopened. The old machine shop became an apprenticeship center. The abandoned blocks were repainted and renamed Hayes Community Hub. One evening at a roadside diner, Laura met Charlie McKenna, a former miner with an oxygen tank beside him, his lungs scarred by years of coal dust. He spoke slowly between breaths. "Your dad saved me during that mine collapse. Now you're saving this whole town." Laura took his hand, eyes glistening. "I'm just finishing what he started." The community began to rally. The local church held weekend fundraisers. School children painted posters titled "Wind is Life." People laughed more now. They talked about the future instead of the past. Each new turbine carried a story: a family with power restored, a store reopened, a worker with a job again. Rosie helped her mother coordinate projects. Ben painted a wooden sign, "Wind line no one." Laura took a photo and posted a simple caption: "From the wind we found each other again." Reporters returned not to ask about scandals, but about hope. One journalist asked, "Do you really think the wind is strong enough to change the whole country?" Laura smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Maybe not, but it's strong enough to change us, and that's where everything begins." As the sun set, the Appalachian wind swept through rows of spinning turbines, casting golden light across the new sign, Hayes Wind Line, built by many hands. 5 years later, the wind still blew endlessly across the Pennsylvania hills. From above, the Hayes Wind Line workshop looked like a metallic heart beating in a field of green, a place once covered in coal, dust, and ruin. Laura walked through the main hall. Photos lined the walls, telling the story of a lifetime. The first, her father standing beside the early turbine model. The second, Laura, Rosie, Ben, and their neighbors raising the first blades. The last is the ribbon cutting of the Wind for Tomorrow Foundation Museum. A small plaque sat by the glass door, in memory of Thomas Hayes, who believed that justice and the wind belonged to everyone. Rosie, now 20, walked up and wrapped an arm around her mother. "Mom, the representative from the National Energy Institute is here. They want you to accept the Woman of the Year award." Laura smiled softly. "I don't need titles, sweetheart. As long as the wind keeps blowing, your grandfather's still alive." The ceremony took place under a clear blue sky. Former miners, young engineers, students, and journalists stood together in the breeze. When Laura took the microphone, her voice trembled but carried strongly. "The day I lifted that rusty floorboard, I thought I'd only find metal and memory. But I found faith, the belief that even one ordinary person can change what's unjust. My father didn't lose. He simply passed his dream on for me to finish." The crowd fell silent. Then the wind swept across the field, spinning the turbines as flags whipped in reply. Above them, a flock of birds circled through the orange-red dusk. That night, Laura returned to her father's old office, now neatly restored, lit by a warm, soft lamp. She opened the drawer and took out the worn journal she had found all those years ago inside the wooden box. On the last page, she wrote her own words: "The wind has changed, and I have heard it." Outside, children's laughter echoed from the new community housing nearby. Ben was now an engineer. Rosie had become a storyteller, traveling across the country to share tales of clean energy and courage. Together, they were helping build new wind workshops in Kentucky, Ohio, and New Mexico. The legacy of Thomas Hayes had become a national movement, from one person to thousands, from one gust of wind to a storm of hope. Laura stepped onto the balcony. Before her, the turbines turned steadily under the silver moonlight. She whispered, as if to her father, "We've won, but more importantly, we've healed." The wind brushed through her hair, carrying a distant echo. The sound of that same wind long ago, and the quiet laughter of the man who had once dared to believe.